overwhelmingly, number one was the economy, and it was laced in the term that the left has used called affordability. And that one issue has driven down Donald Trump's basically 48 to 50 approval ratings the last, 2 months ago down into the lower 40s. We don't know how accurate these polls are, but the left has made the argument that the prices are about 21%, 22% higher than when Donald Trump left, and they are on average about 5.2 higher per year. And Donald Trump in 10 months did not lower. Now, I know you're saying, Victor, that's absurd. It was Joe Biden who did what you just said. Exactly. So why is that issue hurting Donald Trump so much? And what can he do to stop it? Well, the answer is that he assumed, I'm using Donald Trump and his name and he for the whole Trump conglomerate, the whole team. What they assumed was anybody who followed the 2024 campaign would understand that Donald Trump won by pointing to Joe Biden's record. What did he do? $8 trillion in stimulus borrowing. I could go on, but Trump had delineated all of those pathologies in the 2024 campaign that had led to this hyperinflation, the worst in 40 years. Nobody's going to believe affordability from the people who destroyed it. 21 aggregate inflation. If you look at insurance, housing, autos, healthcare, food, staples, 30% it went up under Biden. More than 6% a year. 7% a year, 8% a year on these key staple items that are so essential, power, gas. So I think what I'm getting at is they were kind of asleep at the wheel. They said no one was going to believe that propaganda. They all know that Biden ruined the economy and left us with a mess, and that's why I won the election. Yes, and when you were doing that, that lie about affordability being your fault was reverberating in every single media broadcast. Affordability trumps inflation. And for you not to address that every day and say, wait, the inflation today is 3%. That's what I inherited. And it's only been 10 months, and I've got the whole mechanisms in place to lower it. But I haven't increased inflation one iota. In fact, it's down at 3% from the 5.2. But we didn't get that, is what I'm trying to say. So Donald Trump is saving the world, and quite successfully, with a wonderful foreign policy that is bringing real results both abroad and on the southern border, and that will have economic implications, as will his foreign policy. And meanwhile, the left is saying he cares more about Ukraine, he cares more about the Israelis, he cares more about the Azerbaijanis and Armenians, but us, we care about our affordability. And no one is saying you should care about affordability. You made America unaffordable every year you were in power, and we're undoing your mess. But we haven't had that message, and I hope we will very soon. Thank you very much. This is Victor Davis Hanson for the Daily Signal.
If you want to ask my view and many economists, the reason that we saw a spike in inflation, which is now going down, was not because of that, because of corporate greed, record-breaking profits on the part of food industry, other corporations charging us off-the-wall prices. I think that had a lot to do with inflation.
Unfortunately, it is one of the defects of our political system that we always put a Secretary of the Treasury and other high government officials into a position in which, when they make public statements, they are almost driven. Well, what's the word I want to use? I want to use a polite word, equivocate. Secretary Blumenthal knows as well as you and I do that inflation does not come from trade unions. They don't produce inflation for one simple reason. They do not own a printing press on which you can turn out green pieces of paper. The only such printing press is in Washington. I say printing press, of course, in the modern age we do it in a more sophisticated way. We use bookkeepers and accountants and computers. But it comes down to the same thing. Inflation is made in Washington because only Washington can create money. And any other attribution to other groups of inflation is wrong. Consumers don't produce it. Producers don't produce it. The trade unions don't produce it. Foreign sheiks don't produce it. Oil imports don't produce it. What produces it is too much government spending and too much government creation of money and nothing else.
President Biden today promised he's doing everything he can to tame inflation and bring down prices for Americans. The president says Russia's to blame, also oil companies and shipping conglomerates, as well as Republicans.
Inflation is made in Washington because only Washington can create money. And any other attribution to other groups of inflation is wrong. Consumers don't produce it. Producers don't produce it. The trade unions don't produce it. Foreign sheiks don't produce it. Oil imports don't produce it. What produces it is too much government spending and too much government creation of money and nothing else.
Let's bring in our Caitlin Collins. She's covering the president out in Los Angeles right now. Caitlin, the White House is all too aware this issue of inflation could actually make or break the Democrats coming up in the midterms and in a presidential contest down the road.
Yeah, Wolf, it's a big vulnerability for this president and for his party. Of course, you saw him today not even try to sugarcoat these numbers because really there's no sugarcoating to be done, given it was a very unpleasant surprise for the White House that was hoping these numbers were going to moderate at least slightly in May. And of course, instead they accelerated. And when you heard from President Biden today, he didn't try to make any predictions about when inflation is going to start to go down. And instead, he tried to empathize with Americans who are feeling the pain.
I understand Americans are anxious, and they're anxious for good reason.
President Biden staring down a massive political liability.
Make no mistake about it. I understand inflation is a real challenge to American families.
New data shows consumer prices soared last month, sending inflation climbing 8.6% from last year, the highest since 1981. Biden delivering the bad news today after predicting 6 months ago that the inflation crisis had hit its peak.
I think you'll see it change sooner than quicker, than more rapidly than it will take than most people think.
Prices are now higher for everything from food, fuel, rent to used cars, as Biden officials say that taming inflation is their highest priority.
We are open to ideas. Again, some of them require working with Congress. The president is focused on lowering costs for families.
But those same officials say that the bulk of the response will fall to the Federal Reserve, as Friday's numbers only offer more reason for the central bank to continue raising interest rates.
As part of his plan, I know this doesn't sound like a plan, but first and foremost, he respects the independence of the Federal Reserve.
The troubling figures could spell doom for Democrats in the upcoming midterm elections this November, as Biden lashed out at Republicans, shipping conglomerates, Russian President Putin, and oil companies today.
Exxon made more money than God this year.
Inflation is made in Washington because only Washington can create money. And any other attribution to other groups of inflation is wrong.
The president having a lot of criticism there, Wolf, as he was commenting on these new numbers today. One number the White House was hoping would go down was when it comes to prices on consumer goods. They thought potentially as they worked out issues with the supply chain, that number would start to change. You saw President Biden speaking at the Port of Los Angeles today during his trip here to the West Coast. Of course, those numbers are still high, just as the rest that we were just talking about, Wolf. And yes, this is going to potentially have a drag on Democrats in the midterm elections. That is the concern that you hear from a lot of President Biden's allies on Capitol Hill, because we are just 5 months away from the midterm elections. And look at this poll that came out this week. You see that President Biden's approval numbers are a lot lower than they were when he first took office, but his weakest point right now is on the economy, where he only gets a 28% approval rating, Wolf. So these are the numbers that the White House is very worried about when it comes to the inflation, because they thought it was going to start going down by now. Of course, you saw officials like the Treasury Secretary to you saying that they got it wrong when they said they thought inflation was just going to be temporary. Obviously, it is still here several months later. So now they're trying to focus on empathizing with Americans, on saying that they understand what they're going through, instead of telling them when it's going to come to an end, Wolf.
So when you talk about the economy, of course, it is by far the most important issue for voters. It's also true right now, Mr. President, that voters by a wide margin trust Trump more on the economy. They say that in polls. And part of the reason for that may be the numbers. And you're aware of many of these, of course. The cost of buying a home in the United States is double what it was when you look at your monthly costs from before the pandemic. Real income, when you account for inflation, is actually down since you took office. Economic growth last week, far short of expectations. Consumer confidence, maybe no surprise, is near a 2-year low. With less than 6 months to go to Election Day, are you worried that you're running out of time to turn that around?
We've already turned it around. Look, you look at the Michigan survey. For 65% of American people think they're in good shape economically. They think the nation's not in good shape, but they're personally in good shape. The polling data has been wrong all along. You know, how many, you guys do a poll at CNN, how many folks you have to call to get one response? The idea that we're in a situation where things are so bad, the folks that, I mean, we've created more jobs. We're in a situation where people have access to good paying jobs. And the last I saw, the combination of the inflation, the cost of inflation, all those things, that's really worrisome to people with good reason. That's why I'm working very hard to bring the cost of rentals down, to increase the number of homes that are available. But let me say it this way. When I started this administration, people were saying there's going to be a collapse of the economy. We have the strongest economy in the world. Let me say it again, in the world.
Although GDP last week was far short of expectations.
Oh, it wasn't. Look, GDP is still growing. Look at the response of the markets. Overwhelmingly positive. Overwhelmingly positive. And one of the reasons why people feel good about it not being as strong as it was before is they believe that the Fed's going to respond.
They hope they're going to get a rate cut.
Yeah. Well, so, but I mean, no president's had the run we've had in terms of creating jobs and bringing down inflation. It was 9% when I came to office. 9%. There's corporate greed going on out there, and it's got to be dealt with.
What about, I mean, but there's real pain. I mean, grocery prices are up 30%, more than 30% since the beginning of the pandemic, and people are spending more on food and groceries than they have at any time really in the past 30 years. I mean, that's a real day-to-day pain that people feel.
It really is, and it's real. But the fact is that if you take a look at what the people have, they have the money to spend. It angers them and angers me that you have to spend more. For example, the whole idea of this notion that Senator Casey talked about, shrinkflation. I think it's on your program.
Same price for a smaller bottle of juice or something.
For example, Snickers bar, they did a thing, and it's like 20% less for the same price. That's corporate greed. That's corporate greed. And we've got to deal with it, and that's what I'm working on.
Inflation is made in Washington because only Washington can create money. And any other attribution to other groups of inflation is wrong.